everybody, this is Miss Lovett. Mrs. Lovett has tried making this video twice now and she's getting a little tired, so she went ahead and called in her substitute to help out. Today we will be going over April 8th literacy work for the AMI work with an article titled Who Wants to Visit the North Pole? As we read along, feel free to read along with me on the screen or on your own sheet and have your questions ready because we are going to answer these questions as we get to them. Starting off that first paragraph. There is no land at the North Pole, but it is covered in a thick layer of ice around 6 to 9 feet thick. It floats on top of the Arctic Ocean, which is more than 13,000 feet deep. In the winter, it is very cold, with average temperature being around minus 29 degrees. In the summer, it is quite a bit warmer, around 32 degrees. This may sound cold for summer, but it is actually quite a bit warmer than the South Pole. During April, we think of Matthew Peary, an American explorer who claimed to have reached the North Pole on April 6, 1909. The North Pole is not owned by any country, but rather it is located in international waters. All the lines of longitude meet at the North Pole. If you were to stand on the ice at the North Pole, everywhere you look would be south. During the summer, the sun never sets. The sun rises in March and sets in September. That's a really long day and night. There is actually a lot of controversy about who was the first explorer to visit the North Pole. Many brave explorers have explored the region, but the first person to claim reaching the North Pole was American explorer Frederick Albert Cook in 1908. Cook was unable to provide any navigational records of his achievement, however, and the rest of his team later reported that they did not quite reach the pole. Cook's claim remains controversial. A year later, on April 6, 1909, another American explorer, Robert Peary, claimed to reach the North Pole by dog sled. Peary was supported and funded by the National Geographic Society, which verified his claim. Peary was accompanied by 4 other people, but none of them were trained in navigation. They were therefore unable to verify Peary's claims. One of them, Matthew Henson, even reported a conflicting route from Peary. Peary himself never made his navigational records available for review. Skeptics have noted the remarkable speed with which the expedition traveled once Captain Bob Bartlett, the only other navigator, left the crew. Peary reported more than doubling the amount of territory covered daily as soon as Bartlett left the expedition. Peary's claims also remain controversial. We're going to pause there because our first question states, after reading paragraph 4, which we just read, we can infer that A. Peary later gave his navigational records to people for review. B. Peary's navigational records prove that he reached the North Pole. C. Matthew Henson reported that they had reached the North Pole. D. Some people did not believe the group had reached the North Pole. Now, we notice that it says we can infer, which means while we might not find the exact wording in the sentence for an answer, we are going to find information that helps us infer which one of these is correct. So let me select a color here. We'll go with green. Now, A. Peary later gave his navigational records to people for review. We have a sentence. Peary himself never made his navigational records available for review. Okay, so we know A is not correct. You can go ahead and mark that off. B. Peary's navigational records prove that he reached the North Pole. Now, because that sentence right there, Peary himself never made his navigational records available for review. C. Matthew Henson reported that they had reached the North Pole. Matthew Henson is not in this paragraph at all. Oh, yes he is. I misspoke. Matthew Henson even reported a conflicting route from Peary. So, there we go. I got him confused with Cook. That's why it's important to reread the section as we're looking for our answers and to highlight the sentence in which we find our answer. Well, Matthew Henson does not report that they had reached the North Pole. His gave a conflicting route from Peary, so C is wrong, which leads us to believe that D must be correct since it's the only one left. However, let's reread it and see if that does sound like the right answer. Some people did not believe the group had reached the North Pole. Throughout this, we can see that skeptics have noted that the remarkable speed with which the expedition traveled once Captain Bob Bartlett, the only other navigator, left the crew. Peary's claim also remains controversial. And the skeptics lead us to believe that, after reading this paragraph, we can infer that some people did not believe the group had reached the North Pole. So for number 1, the answer is D. Let's move on to number 2 and see if we've already read the paragraph that gives us this answer. Under the ice at the North Pole is A, land that belongs to all countries, B, land that is located in international waters, C, the Arctic Ocean, D, the Antarctic Ocean. Now, we were given a lot of information, a lot of facts about the North Pole in paragraph 1, so let's take a look back up there. There is no land at the North Pole. Oh, well, automatically A and B must be wrong. There is no land at the North Pole, so it can't be land that belongs to all countries or land that is located in international waters. Okay, it floats on top, there we go, on top of the Arctic Ocean, highlighting that because that is our answer. If it floats on top of the Arctic Ocean, that means that below the ice at the North Pole is the Arctic Ocean. Answer C. So number 2, C. Let's go on to number 3, see if we've gotten to this yet. The author organizes paragraphs 5 through 9 by... we haven't gotten to that yet, but let's go ahead and read the answers so we can have that in mind as we read the rest of our article. A. Describing various trips to the North Pole in the order that they occurred. B. Describing various trips to the North Pole in order of importance. C. Comparing and contrasting the various trips to the North Pole. D. Describing the causes and effects of various trips to the North Pole. So as we read paragraph 5 through 9, in the back of your mind, think about how is the author organizing these paragraphs. Starting with paragraph 5. The first verified expedition to the North Pole was conducted by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen in May of 1926. Amundsen did not use a ship or dog sleds. He flew over the pole on the airship Norge. The Norge was a dirigible lifted by hydrogen and powered by a diesel engine. It flew over the North Pole on its route from the Norwegian Arctic to the U.S. state of Alaska. The first people verified to have set foot at the North Pole were a research group of geologists and oceanographers from the Soviet Union in 1948. The scientists were flown in and out of the pole over a 3-day period. The first watercraft to reach the North Pole was a nuclear-powered submarine, the Nautilus, a U.S. submarine. In 1958, it became the first vessel to cruise under the North Pole. In 1986, the first woman to reach the North Pole. Be careful as you read to make sure you're reading the correct verb, reached. In 1986, the first woman reached the North Pole. That completely changed the meaning of that sentence. She was Anne Bancroft, who was accompanied by a team of 4 men. They rode to the North Pole on dog sleds, pulled by a team of 21 dogs. The first commercial North Pole expedition was in 1993. It was led by Dr. Mikhail Malakhov. Today, numerous companies take more than 100 people annually to the pole. The purpose is usually to study the area for scientific reasons. Okay, so we've read paragraphs 5 through 9. Now let's think about how the author organized these paragraphs. So A, describing various trips to the North Pole in the order that they occurred. Okay, so let's see if that's true. We'll pick a nice orange. So number 5, we talk about the first verified expedition that happened in 1926. 6, the people verified to have set foot happened in 1948. Okay, that's after 1926. Next paragraph. That's our first watercraft that reaches the North Pole in 1958. Again, that's 10 years after this last paragraph. And then we jump to 1986, okay? And then 1993. Looking at these dates, it does appear that our paragraphs are ordered by the time in which they occurred, meaning that A is correct. But to check ourselves, let's go through the other options to make sure that they're incorrect. B. Describing various trips to the North Pole in order of importance. Well, the author never makes an argument of which of these expeditions is more important. Is it more important to go by foot, to go by watercraft, to go by aircraft, dog sled? They never make that argument, so B is not correct. C. Comparing and contrasting the various trips to the North Pole. While the author does provide information on these expeditions, they never really compare them together or contrast them. Sure, number 5 talks about the first verified expedition, whereas 6 is the first people to have set foot and 7 is the first watercraft. That's not the main point here, so it's not C. And D, describing the causes and effects of various trips to the North Pole. Now, this one is obviously incorrect because we never talk about the effects that going to the North Pole has for these expeditions. We just talk about when they got there, how they got there, and what time. So A, describing various trips to the North Pole in the order that they occurred, is the correct answer for 3. Let's move on to number 4. Cook's claim to have reached the North Pole is controversial because, first we need to find Cook again. So let's skim and look for Cook. Cook is in paragraph number 3. All right, and his claims to have reached the North Pole is controversial because A, no one accompanied him, so there were no witnesses. Rest of his team. Okay, so A is incorrect. He had a team with him. B, he traveled by dog sled. Okay, first person to claim reaching the North Pole was American explorer. Okay, I don't see anything about dog sleds. Not B. C, he was first to reach the North Pole, so no one believed him. No, that doesn't sound quite right, but let's check on with D. He kept no records of reaching the North Pole, so it's between C and D right now. Let's find the answer within the text and highlight it so we know that we are correct. Cook was unable to provide any navigational records of his achievement. There we go. Cook's claim remains controversial. He was unable to provide any records, so D is correct. He kept no records of reaching the North Pole, so how can we really believe he actually went there? Number 5. Why did the author include the map with his passage? Okay, this is now referring to the diagram we have at the bottom right of our article, North Pole Globe. We can take a look at here. Here is our North Pole, and then it shows our longitudinal and latitudinal lines. These guys, the horizontal and the vertical ones, and then we have our land masses. We also have a little excerpt next to it that says the nearest land to the North Pole is 700 miles away. Let's look at what answers we have. We have the options of A, to show the routes taken by different explorers. I see no routes here. Do you see any routes? No. So A is incorrect. B, to show the North Pole in relation to the land that surrounds it. Now this one sounds pretty good so far. We do have our North Pole, and we do have the land masses next to it, along with the quote that says the nearest land to the North Pole is 700 miles away. But let's make sure this is right by checking every other option. C, to show the shortest route to the North Pole. Again, there are no routes, so we know C is incorrect. D, to show how difficult it was to fly across the North Pole. There's no mention of flying here. There are no pictures of the planes and the routes they would take, so it's not D. I believe B is going to be the best answer here, and it is to show the North Pole in relation to the land that surrounds it. It is just wanting us to get an idea of how far away the North Pole is from land. So the answer for number 5, B, as in boy. 6, the word dirigible in paragraph 5 means, first let's move back up to paragraph 5. We have dirigible already underlined for us. How nice is that? Now, this word could mean A, a submarine, B, a dog sled, C, an aircraft, D, a ship. Let's reread that sentence so we can figure out the best definition for dirigible. The Norge was a dirigible lifted by hydrogen and powered by a diesel engine. So far we automatically know it's not a dog sled or a ship. Well, Some ships have engines, so perhaps it is, but we know it's not a dog sled because dog sleds don't have engines. So let's read further on. It flew over the North Pole on its route. Flew. Okay. It must be an aircraft C. That's our only option that we have something that is able to fly. Now, if you wanted to be absolutely certain, you could look back at this sentence. He flew over the pole on the airship Norge. The Norge was a dirigible, and it flew. Those are all wonderful context clues that allow us to infer that dirigible must mean an aircraft. The answer for number 6 is C. And that is our AMI work for April 8th, Literacy. I hope you all enjoyed this. It was a very fun article. I did not know all that information about the North Pole. And if you have any questions, you can comment them in Google Classroom, I believe. Bye!